Trying to decide between the iPad Air and the iPad mini can be a really, really tough choice, and one that I've been going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on for a couple of weeks now. And I finally landed on the one decision, the one deciding factor that actually helps me make the decision, and I want to share that with you. And that reason, that deciding factor, really comes down to two different cases. One, you don't have an iPad at all and you're shopping for a new tablet. Or two, you already have an iPad Air or you have an iPad mini and you're thinking about switching from one to the other. Hi everybody, foXnoMad here, and today I want to help you travel smarter by comparing iPads. And I'm guessing if you travel a lot, you either already have an iPad or you've been thinking about getting one because they are just so useful on planes, trains, and automobiles. Laptops are bulky, and even a MacBook Air is pretty impossible to open on an economy seat, so any iPad makes reading, watching videos, and writing all that much easier because it cuts out the bulk. I travel a lot, pretty much all the time in a nomadic lifestyle, so I value portability. I switched from a larger Mavic drone to a Mavic Mini 2 because it was smaller and lighter, but also because the technology had caught up and I could get more or less the same video quality and other functionality as I did in the larger Mavic in the smaller and newer Mini 2. Which brings me to iPads. First off, if you travel frequently, you can't really go wrong with either the iPad mini or the Air. Both are slim and light. I'm using the 458 gram iPad Air 4, and the newer updated M1 iPad Air weighs only 461 grams and is 248 by 178 by 6 millimeters. Now, compared to the iPad mini, which is 293 grams, you can feel the Air's added heft, but it's the size difference you really notice. The mini is a lot smaller than the Air, but the Air gives you about 45% more screen real estate than the mini, even though it's only about 50 millimeters taller. When you use the mini for a while, the Air feels huge, but compared to the devices you're already using, and that will help you put it in better perspective. If you use a larger screen laptop, then the Air becomes a good in-between it and your phone. Or if you use a particularly small phone like the iPad SE, then the mini might be a nice bump up in screen size for reading, watching videos, and checking social media. The iPad mini also has a very sharp 326 pixels per inch, sharper than the M1 iPad, and it's especially nice to look at. The M1 iPad Air's 246 pixels per inch though is no slouch, and both iPad displays make for a pleasant viewing experience, with some exceptions on the mini. First, there is this weird green tone shift when you start to take the iPad mini in landscape and when it's set into night shift and you kind of move it like this, you'll notice that it gets a little bit green. Tilt the screen just a little bit and it really skews to this green tint. I'm not sure if the camera will pick this up, and I'm not very nitpicky about displays, but this one is quite noticeable. What's not noticeable is jelly scroll, which is a weird wobbly effect you get when you rapidly scroll up and down the screen. I only noticed it a rare handful of times, and I had to be both looking for it and scrolling wildly like this to make it happen. It's certainly a drawback of the display, but only if you're doing this all the time, which you're probably not. Another thing about the mini is that when you're holding it vertically, typing with your thumbs makes more sense, whereas with the Air, you can get away with trying to type with all your fingers. For jotting notes or short emails, it's fine, and you can always switch to landscape for a better typing experience. Unfortunately, a lot of apps aren't optimized for the mini, so YouTube live chats and email clients might look a lot more scrunched than you'd like. Still, it gets the job done, and if you've got a laptop, then the iPad becomes a consumption device mainly. But if you want a computer replacement or something close to it, then the iPad Air is the better choice since it works with Apple's Magic Folio keyboard, but with the mini, you're stuck to off-brand Bluetooth options. The iPad mini also has some weird font sizing issues where you can't just enlarge the text using iPadOS. I know it sounds like I'm complaining about the mini, but it's more that it doesn't feel like an entirely completed device compared to the Air or larger iPads. A lot of this comes down to software, but Apple recently released the iPad Air M1, which gives you better performance with the M1 chip, doubled the memory from 4 gigabytes to 8 gigabytes, and it got a little bit of a display boost, making it a more powerful and prettier device to use. And that's what brings me on how to decide between these two iPads. First of all, if you already have an iPad Air or an iPad mini that you're happy with, you won't be disappointed in either of those upgrades. So if you're going from an older mini to a newer mini, you'll be very happy because there are significant changes between the iPad mini 6 and the 5. And if you're going from an older Air or an older 8th gen or 7th gen iPad to a newer iPad Air, you also won't be disappointed. They're both great devices. But if you're thinking of downsizing between the iPad Air or a larger iPad and going with the iPad mini, then you might want to consider waiting. The reason being is the M1 iPad Air gives us a good glimpse into what Apple might have planned for the mini. By putting the M1 chip in the Air and not doing much else aside from the memory and display upgrades, it seems very likely Apple will do this to the iPad mini as well, sometime probably before the end of the year. Normally, I don't like to make tech purchase decisions based on rumors or what might come next because there's always a update that's going to be coming up next. But if you're going to be spending at least $500 on an iPad mini and you've already spent $600 at least getting an iPad Air, then you really need a good reason to switch between the larger iPad Air to the iPad mini. Otherwise, you're just buying two iPads for roughly $1,000. In other words, I don't think that the smaller iPad is worth switching to based on portability alone. And I travel a lot, and it's very important for me that my devices are all portable. But I'm happy with the iPad Air, and you might be happy with the iPad that you're using, even if it's a little bit larger, because although this mini is really small and probably the ideal size for a tablet, and the Air seems huge in comparison, when you take this out of the equation, the iPad Air is really not all that big. It's a very slim device and it'll fit in your backpack, so it's not really huge. Plus, you get the same longevity. They're basically running in more or less the same capacity, the same internals. They're very similar in what they can actually do. The screens are very similar, even though this one is a little bit sharper. They're very similar devices. So if you've already spent, $600 on this and you want to switch to this, I don't think it's worth paying $500 to switch from an iPad Air over to an iPad mini. The iPad mini is very comfortable to hold, and the size is perfect for reading books. It's ergonomic, and I don't get any red marks in my palms after reading for a while when using the mini. It also fits so nicely in my backpack. I can stream YouTube or other shows to larger screens using AirPlay, and although the battery life is not as good as the Air, about 7 to 8 hours with heavy use versus closer to 10 with the iPad Air, the size is just right. But the power isn't there yet to offset the disadvantages of getting the iPad mini. So the decision really comes down to your budget, your needs, and your wants. If you're going with just a single iPad, you just want one iPad, and you already have an iPad Air or an iPad that's larger or an iPad that you're just happy with, then switching to the mini is really like a want. You just want to switch to the mini. You're not really getting anything other than the portability, unless you're coming from a very older iPad. Then you're going to get a lot of performance. You're going to get the newer design. It's going to be great. But if you're doing multiple iPads, then the iPad mini makes a great addition. So if you've got an iPad Pro or you've got a mid-size iPad Air, then the iPad mini makes a perfect addition to the lineup. But if you're going to make that jump for portability alone, then you might be better off waiting until September, October, or November. There's a good chance we might see an upgraded or updated or refreshed iPad mini sometime this coming fall. So if you can wait until the fall just to see what Apple releases, it might be worth it if you already have an iPad that you're happy with. Because to me, what would make the iPad mini close to the perfect tablet for travel, home, or just general use would be making it something akin to an iPad mini Pro. Apple could update the screen to potentially fix that jelly scrolling issue, which a lot of people have been complaining about, or get rid of that green tint when you're holding it sort of on axis like this when it's a night shift, and other times as well you might start to notice it. And another thing is battery life. So you get about 7 hours of battery life on screen time with the iPad mini. But if you're doing anything more intensive than reading or watching videos, if you're gaming, you're going to get a lot less. So if you have the screen brightness up a lot, you're going to really eat through that battery and you're going to notice it. So although the battery life is pretty good on the iPad mini, increasing it, just getting a little bit more out of the battery that they have in here would be great. And those would all be good reasons to switch. That would make me switch from the iPad Air I have over to the mini because it is just absolutely the best form factor. This is a great size for a tablet. It's just so nice to hold. I have both of these tablets and I end up holding this one more. I like using this one more. I like reading with it. I like having a smaller screen to read on. It's a little bit more comfortable just in general daily use. So there's a lot to love about the form factor. And with a couple of upgrades and updates by Apple, this could be the ultimate iPad. And for people coming from larger iPads, you've now just given them massive incentives to switch. Massive incentives to switch. But for now, if you're already happy with the iPad that you have, even if it is a larger iPad, then I don't think Apple has quite given you or me enough reason to make the switch based on size and portability alone. And if you don't have an iPad at all, you're not going to be disappointed with either of these devices. They're great for what they do. They're really useful. They're very portable. They're great for travel. If you read on the plane, you want to watch movies on a plane or on a train, or, just take notes. They're both great devices. So if you don't have an iPad at all, you won't be disappointed with either. Hopefully this video helps you make the decision between the iPad Air and the iPad mini, especially if you travel frequently or you already have one of these devices and you were thinking, hey, do I want to downsize or do I want to upgrade to get more screen real estate? Hopefully this helps you make that decision. But if you have any questions, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'll have new videos for you every week, and I'll see you in the next video.